The idea of comedy games has fascinated me for some time, likely due to the fact that when compared to, say, action or horror, it's a genre that's remained remarkably underexplored in the interactive realm. It's easy to create action by putting a gun in a player's hand and telling them to shoot things. You can manufacture an omnipresent feeling of dread even when you're not directly scaring a player. Telling an effective joke, however, is difficult to pull off in any medium. It relies so heavily on being able to specifically direct an audience's attention with a precision of timing that you simply can't guarantee when, in games, you hand control of said joke over to your audience. Look up any list of the most comedic video games and you'll likely see a lot of the usual suspects. The searing satire of Grand Theft Auto or the passive aggression of GLaDOS in Portal, for example. Outside of a few noteworthy cases though, regardless of your thoughts on how funny these individual games actually are, what sets them apart as comic often has little to do with how you actually play them. These are games with comedic writing, decorating otherwise unrelated game mechanics. But what about games that specifically set out to be funny, whose moment-to-moment interactions hinge on trying to make you laugh above all else? Well, in most cases of late, the more prominent examples of this have involved an examination of the wackiness inherent to controlling a game itself. Asking why players adhere to arbitrary objectives, poking fun at the way things like movement or picking up an object are taken for granted as a simple button press, or introducing an element of anarchic chaos to mundane situations. Games like Surgeon Simulator and Goat Simulator offer countless opportunities for absurd humour as you wreak unintentional havoc on a quiet town, a carnival, a desk, or someone's brain. That said, the havoc is indeed unintentional. The immediate comedy of these games largely spawns from the difficulty most people will face trying to play them quote-unquote correctly. They go so far in making simple tasks as difficult as possible that part of their charm lies in how frustrating they can often be. To write them off as bad games or simply random for the sake of it does a disservice, I believe, to just how fine-tuned Surgeon Simulator's ridiculous controls actually are, or the way Goat Simulator pokes fun at the eerie, uncanny worlds found in more conventional simulator games. But the player isn't so much enacting the punchline of a joke here, as they are kind of the punchline itself. The fact that you're playing this game at all, that you're directly fighting the fundamentals of control in order to get a better score, I guess, is part of the joke. You might see other visual gags around, you may enter the offices of the developer, for example, but the extent of your ability to create comedy is the extent of your ability to flail around. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, you have a game like Jazzpunk, which flat out markets itself as comedy. Since its release in 2014, it remains a really neat experiment in favouring jokes rather than mechanical engagement, all with an endlessly charming aesthetic. But that's just it though, whether the end result of your interactions is setting off a Rube Goldberg-esque series of events leading to a punchline or simply pushing someone off a bridge, as far as your agency over it all goes, you're mainly just pressing A to see joke. Your opinion of Jazzpunk then is likely going to come down purely to how funny you think said jokes are, because that's kind of it. And so we have full-blown anarchic absurdity on one side, and we have games where you merely turn the joke crank on the other. But is it beyond the interactive medium to allow players to actually tell those jokes? To set up and execute on their own punchlines through mechanics and systems? Well, enter Untitled Goose Game, a release that might be the purest embodiment of a comedy game I've yet seen. For a start, its premise is funny for sure. For an Australian game, it captures that particularly British sentiment of the stiff upper lip extremely well. That idea of pretending nothing is wrong in order to avoid the social awkwardness of confronting the very obvious issue at hand. What's great about Goose Game though is that it doesn't need to spew jokes at you in order to convey this. Instead, the game uses its systems, making it your goal to organically create said awkwardness. Not outright havoc, not violence or death and destruction, but awkwardness specifically. The game presents a series of clockwork systems and through simple stealth mechanics combined with low stakes scenarios, encourages you to find ways to disrupt the natural flow of things in order to ruin someone's day just a bit. And it all starts with the simple fact that every action here has a reaction. Outside of the differing severity with which each NPC treats the goose's presence, their routines come down to one simple trait. If they notice something something is out of place on their route around any given area, they attempt to put it back. It's a really simple thing, but consider that purely by virtue of getting a reaction out of people, your actions suddenly carry much more weight than causing untold destruction and having no one care. Further, where the humour of a similarly systems-driven game like Hitman is perhaps an unexpected side effect of a game that has you trying to hitman someone while avoiding being hitmaned yourself, Goose Game has no such failure state. Instead, when you get caught, you drop the item you were holding and flap around wildly as a gooses want to do. This lack of a failure state not only reduces frustration, all in, your goose feels incredibly satisfying to control, which is more than can be said for other animal-based absurdity generators, but it also reduces the stakes of any encounter to something more relatable, more in line with the overall mischievous tone of the game at large. It all serves to build the character of this world without needing dialogue, painting the goose as a petulant child unwilling to take no for an answer rather than some kind of powerhouse, and the villagers as mildly irritated as opposed to cowering in fear. Well, most of the time anyway. The villagers just want to keep this world prim and proper, which gives you all the more reason to cause a mess. You may just be untying someone's shoe or misplacing their possessions, but that's all you need to do to make an impact here. It's a stealth game where the supposed enemies are very much aware of your presence and the inevitability of incoming inconvenience. And with this, the stage is set for you to plan and execute your own hijinks. After getting the gardener to open the gate and repeating the same routine of moving objects around, being chased, and having said objects taken away from you, you might notice that the keys to the gate are an item like any other you can stuff in your beak, and that the gate itself is an interactable part of the environment. And so you lure him out, steal his keys, and close the gate behind him, causing uninterrupted chaos while he watches on powerlessly. It's a satisfying realization to act upon, but it's also just a solid gag. Gardener goes to sort a problem, and thanks to you, ends up making things so much worse. It's a scenario made all the funnier when you realise that you're also stuck without him, so you coyly stick your head through the gate, whereupon he snatches his stolen keys before grumpily marching back in as you nonchalantly walk beside him like nothing has happened. The goose's blank expression very much painting them as some kind of pet who stares you coldly in the eyes as they slowly push a fragile object off a high shelf. You strut along, confident in the knowledge there's nothing this person can do to get rid of you, and that he, like all the villagers you'll come to terrorise, is resigned to their life in Goose Hell. It's a sequence of experimentation and discovery found across all areas of the game, where you might wonder what would happen if you put someone else's stuff on the shop podium, knowing how aggressive the shopkeeper is based on how she reacts to you. That, or you consider how the old man might return an object you've dragged through from the neighbour's garden when the only passage between the two houses is conveniently goose-sized. The game never guides you towards any of this stuff, it merely provides you the pieces and invites you to put them together how you see fit, fully prepared to provide you with some kind of payoff for your poking and prodding, turning every object you come across, every move you make, into a potential joke. And it's all the more rewarding and crucially funny for the fact that you stumbled across it all yourself. And what's more, you still have that same style of video game wackiness you get from more outwardly absurd titles. The complex series of machinations leading to the delightfully wicked punchline of a kid losing his glasses is made all the crueler by the fact that the kid will forever be searching for those glasses unless you choose to close that systemic loop. It's yet another layer of control placed in the player's hands about just how much they want to toy with these villagers, drawing comedy not only from the gag itself, but also the fact that it's being controlled in a video game. But it's not just the systems themselves that make Goose Game a fantastic example of a primarily comedic video game. Alongside the deeply expressive animations conveying character without words and really selling the reactions of your victims, Goose Game's soundtrack is arguably the glue that binds everything else about the game's humour together. See, as opposed to a traditional score, the game takes disparate fragments of the piece Minstrels from Debussy's Preludes, itself a kind of patchwork of jaunty staccato rhythms and jarring modulations, and uses it to accentuate your movement. Tiptoeing around and scouting the area will result in plinkety arpeggios. Preparing to strike will see the music swell discordantly until you finally make your move and a cartoonish melody explodes as you tumble triumphantly away. It's like your every step is being uniquely soundtracked backed by Carl Stalling or something, like you're the central character in a Looney Tune of your own creation. Music isn't a constant underlying bed here, it's not an afterthought. It's dynamic, with periods of silence, build-ups, and releasing of tension reflecting your precise movements. The music, like seemingly everything else about Goose Game's aesthetic and technical workings, is a mechanic in service of amplifying your own comedy. Of course, a video like this is barely going to scratch the surface of what a comedy game entails. There are plenty of other games that experiment with comedic mechanics, and there's no way I could cover all of it. I'm not saying you should take my reading as gospel, I'm not saying that any of the games I've mentioned are bad because they don't do exactly what Goose Game does. I'm just saying that when I envision what a comedy game could be, a complicated joke that requires a mere button press to get the gears turning is always going to pale in comparison to a simple joke that players are allowed to control the precise workings of. Or we could just disregard all of this and think that it's just kind of funny to flap around as a wee goose, you know, that's fine too. So I hope you enjoyed my piece on comedy games. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank my patrons, who are the ones that make videos like this possible. You can really help out and join the names on screen by heading to patreon.com/writingongames and pledging even $1 or $2. You ensure I can keep doing this work, and for that I cannot thank you enough. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Sivas, Artyom Vitsyuk, Rob, Bryce Snyder, Tommy Carver-Chaplin, David Björk, Lucas, Hibi Amori, Dallas Keane, William Fielder, my dad, Ali Al-Muhanna, Timothy Jones, Spike Jones, The Nameless Guy, Ham Migas, Samuel Pickens, Shardfire, Anna Pimentel, Jesse Ryan, Justin's Holderness, Nicholas Ross, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.